Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave, and this week it's our special subject for November 2024, supported by Oscar Levant, the 1940s. As that implies, there will be a sequel, the 1950s. That one's coming next year, so keep an ear out for that. We'll be talking about Rhapsody in Blue, Humoresque, Romance on the High Seas, and the Barkleys of Broadway. Before we do any of that, maybe we should reminisce a little bit about our histories and feelings about Oscar Levant coming into the episode.
Well, I had some synchronicity on the day that we were watching most of these movies on the weekend.
Yes, you posted it on Facebook.
Well, I didn't post it on our very much unattended podcast Facebook feed.
Oh yeah, I think that might be defunct.
It might be defunct in fact. So yeah, defunct in fact. This was from November 16th. 2008. Oh, this is back when I was doing the cute thing that people do or did in those days when they first get on Facebook. Use the Facebook prompt as though your name is the first part of the sentence. So, Elise Moore should have been more careful what she wished for at the age of 12. Still, being Oscar Levant is almost as fun as it looks.
And what did you mean by that?
It's not entirely easy to explain, but when I was 12, I had a bit of an initiation into classic Hollywood films. I guess I would say that would be my second wave of initiation, because in our childhoods in the 70s and early 80s, it wasn't abnormal to watch the occasional big classic Hollywood film with your family, like It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas, Gone with the Wind, sometimes came on holidays.
Wizard of Oz.
Sure. 10 Commandments.
Easter Spectaculars.
Right. But I didn't know any films beyond those. It was holiday family films. Then I started babysitting for a couple who had a bunch of Bogey and Bacall films on VHS and a bunch of Gene Kelly musicals. And that was it. So I started watching them after the kids went to bed and got really hooked on Gene Kelly. And I saw Oscar Levant in An American in Paris. That was my introduction to him. Consider that I was going through puberty at the time. Consider that that's often not happy for humans, right? And I was not happy about it at all.
Can be a difficult time.
I was not happy about having to progress with my gender role, and I was not happy about, relatedly, the prospect of having to do romance as, my concepts of that having been formed by popular culture, of course. And Oscar Levant in An American in Paris was just so absolutely and completely divorced from that. He seemed to exist in his own entirely separate sphere. So his combination of detachment from heteronormativity and sexuality in general, in that movie especially, and his angst really made him resonate with me. And his hostility toward everything, but convention in particular.
But it's a very engaging, good-natured kind of hostility.
Oh, that's not how I took it.
Interesting.
That's not how I took it when I was 12. I don't know how good-natured Oscar Levant is, the persona. Sometimes more than others, and always at moments, and always underlyingly.
I did find him kind of lovable, lovable curmudgeon. That does seem to be closer to what he was actually like in real life, from what I gather. I've read a couple of his autobiographies now. The man had a million friends, beloved by the public.
But
right?
He also did alienate people.
Sure, of course. The way he writes about Gershwin, we're going to be talking about Rhapsody in Blue. I mean, he did make fun of him quite a bit, but, he loved this guy. Also, he kind of was in awe of his talent to some extent and compensated by putting out his little satirical barbs. But it was certainly not meant to alienate, even though the comments were intended to be incisive and often were quite perceptive.
I'm not saying that he's hostile toward people, hostile toward convention.
Yeah.
A figure who just exists in his own sphere and is very unlike the other Hollywood stars in all of these films. And he's there to add that texture. texture, that alien texture.
As we'll discuss, I'm sure, in the movies that we talk about, he displays quite a bit of emotional sensitivity throughout these films.
In his own particular way. And the man had serious self-image problems, and that's the other bit of this persona. He was very self-loathing, and that becomes part of his strange comic act, and that is something that resonated with me as a depressed pubescent. The joke on my Facebook page was that when I was 12, I was like, let me be this person. Let me be this person who is just outside of and hostile to everything that I'm told that I'm supposed to want to be. Let me be that person. And then it turned out that in many ways that became the case. But the source of Oscar Levant's own humor at his own expense was his sense of failure as an artist, which seems much more justified in my case, since I actually have not produced any art since I was very young, I mean officially, professionally, than in his case, in which he was a highly accomplished pianist and composer and famous.
Yeah.
But he felt undoubtedly worse about himself than I do about myself.
Definitely part of the appeal of Oscar Levant, this idea that the sky's the limit and you're not getting anywhere near the sky. Of course, he's one of the most famous geniuses manqués of all time. I mean, he's right up there with Orson Welles in some ways, although I guess people would say Orson Welles really did reach the summit occasionally. And the truth is, Oscar Levant did as well. I mean, the most acclaimed interpreter of George Gershwin's music after Gershwin himself.
But of course, what he wanted to be was George Gershwin.
It's all about your own expectations and expectations others have for you. And as Oscar Levant would tell people when he was in the mood to be candid, I mean, all of his hostility was based on this idea that he was going to head people off who might have criticism to express about him. He was going to do it first and do it more scathingly about himself. But let's sketch out just very briefly his trajectory. He's born in Pittsburgh in 1906. So that's going to become very relevant as we interrogate the fiction that is Rhapsody in Blue. I mean, he's 8 years younger than Gershwin. He was not hanging around Max Dreyfuss's office when Gershwin was 20. He was a 12-year-old at that time. But he was precocious and he was an autodidact, and people did realize that he was pretty special, and he wound up getting involved quite early in the entertainment world and lapping up as much knowledge as he could from vaudevillians, from symphony musicians and conductors and composers. He had a real talent for insinuating himself into these circles, and obviously those people were seeing something in him.
You know, you brought up Orson Welles, and in many cases, this is the curse of the child prodigy or precocious talent, to view themselves that way as never ever being able to reach their potential. And when I was 12, I didn't know I was going to be a sort of child prodigy, but it was going to happen pretty soon.
One of the reasons I always liked him, for sure, was that everyone was telling me when I was a teenager I was going to be something very special, and I didn't think I was going to wind up being that special, and I turned out to be right.
I was very wrong about myself. I thought I was going to be a lot more special than I am.
Well, you're very special.
Aww.
That's one of the things I loved about Oscar Levant. Back to the biography. In the mid-20s, I mean, he starts to make progress in that milieu. He winds up meeting Gershwin. He is asked to record Rhapsody in Blue. Their friendship takes off from there. He winds up composing popular songs and trying to crash the concerto world as well. His talent on the piano, he keeps saying that, you know, Gershwin played his own music better than Levant did. He admits that. But Levant could play any other music better than Gershwin, and he was a very celebrated pianist, and his knowledge was vast.
Yeah, it makes me feel like, what is the difference between Oscar Levant, whose whole persona is based on claiming that he is not a genius, and Glenn Gould, who was also a character and a precocious, great pianist, who became probably Canada's single most celebrated genius? What is the difference? Just Oscar Levant's self-perception, his self-presentation?
Yeah, it seems like it. One of the things that came out, something I probably should have known before now, but I really never did, John Garfield based his portrayal of Mickey Borden in Four Daughters on Oscar Levant. And I mean, that really pulls everything into focus. So the eternally perceptive Garfield.
Well, that's a self thwarting genius.
Exactly.
Right?
A suicidal one, ultimately. And Oscar Levant was never suicidal, but increasingly he succumbs to a deep drive to nothingness. I mean, his big problem in the 50s and 60s, when he was very ill and not able to perform at his best and be the person that we see in these 40s movies, all he wanted to do was take as many sleeping pills as he could and be asleep all the time. I mean, his wife, her main job was to try to stop him from doing this. And he wasn't suicidal. He just wanted to be asleep.
Sometimes I think that by not trying to be a genius, I mean, privately I do still try. You and I know about that. But by not kind of getting in the race of being the genius, by withdrawing myself from that, sometimes I think that that is what I avoided.
Probably saved you.
Because I'm relatively happy.
Yeah. We've got this wonderful podcast that we're offering to the world. His fame jumped up several notches in the late 1930s when he became a panelist on Information Please, which is really the greatest radio show of all time. I recommend it wholeheartedly. I can't get enough of listening to it, and the Levant episodes are certainly the best, although I like them all. He appeared basically 2 out of every 3 weeks for quite a while. They did have to let him have some time to give concerts and appear in movies occasionally, but he's a pretty constant presence on there for about 6-7 years. It's just really entertaining, and you don't know what he's going to say. And every once in a while you hear Clifton Fadiman, the master of ceremonies and quizmaster, say, Oscar, you stop talking like that now. You're going to get us kicked off the air. He did manage to tread that line pretty well, and he did get kicked off eventually. Not exactly sure why. I think just privately for offending the sponsors. Great show. It certainly improved his brand with a wider swath of the American public and cleared the way for him to appear in Hollywood movies. And that's where we're going to take up with Oscar. We did skip a few of the early films he was in, and some of them he's got decent-sized roles, but we had to pick. Even doing 4 is kind of pushing it. We'll see how long this episode goes. And we're going to start with Rhapsody in Blue. First, we'll hear what Leonard Maltin had to say about it. He gives it 3 stars out of a possible 4. Hollywood biography of George Gershwin is largely pulp fiction, but comes off more credibly and interestingly than most other composer biopics, capturing Gershwin's enthusiasm for his work and some of the inner conflicts he faced. Highlight his virtually complete performance of the title work, the director Irving Rapper, and the cast list: Robert Alda, playing Gershwin, Joan Leslie, Alexis Smith, Oscar Levant, Charles Coburn, Julie Bishop, Albert Basserman, Morris Karnofsky, Herbert Ridley, Rosemary DeCamp, Paul Whiteman, and Hazel Scott.
So Dave, just let me start by saying one thing. I only saw Rhapsody in Blue once before with you. Humoresque I've seen many times. And watching them on the same day made me realize that they seem to be in dialogue with each other. And as it turns out, that might be because a key screenwriter on both
Odets
was Clifford Odets, who is uncredited on Rhapsody in Blue, but, well, there's a quote on the Wikipedia page in which Irving Rapper basically credits the screenplay to him.
Well, Oscar Levant in Memoirs of an Amnesiac says that Humoresque was just filming the original script that Odets had written. That's what he says, anyway.
No, that makes complete sense. Now, on top of which there are some other interesting screenwriters, very lefty screenwriters, Howard Koch and Robert Rossen, important to the interpretation of it. But before we get into that, Dave, why don't you talk about your history with this film?
This one I saw in the 80s when I was a teenager. I love this movie. I've always loved it. It is absolutely hogwash if you're talking about biographical facts of Gershwin's life. I mean, the character played by Joan Leslie doesn't exist in real life, right? She's a composite, possibly. You would not go to this in order to try to get the blow-by-blow history of Gershwin's life.
It is so irrelevant that I didn't even bother to look up anything about Gershwin.
We did Night and Day fairly recently. I always bring up Rhapsody in Blue as a comparison to Night and Day because both of them are equally fictional, but Night and Day just isn't anything else besides a travesty. And this is really quite an interesting excursion into the struggle between the aesthetic life and the interpersonal life. I mean, it's a really great dramatization of that push and pull and the desire for humans to do all of those things, but is it even possible?
Did you also think about, from our previous Actourist series, did you also think about Lottie in Weimar? It's about the same topic, but it has a different take. The biographical details of Gershwin's life are irrelevant to evaluating this movie, but it's not irrelevant that the movie is about George Gershwin, because in addition to being what you're saying, it being a kind of Künstlerroman, it's also an essay on the idea of the American artist.
Well, sure.
That's why it's relevant. That's why we need to talk about the big fat lefties who wrote this screenplay. Howard Koch, Rawson, and Odets among the screenwriters. In that case, it's a movie that's very self-aware about the problems with race as part of this thesis, as part of this idea of what American art is.
And class, of course. It's nicely embedded in the world of the Lower East Side that Gershwin grows up in. And we get some establishing scenes that linger throughout the rest of the film. You understand where Gershwin is coming from.
One of the things that's so interesting about it, that I was thinking about while watching it this time, is that for the first 3/4 of the movie, it feels like it is a movie about an artist who has no struggles, who is not tormented. Elda is just playing this character as a blank for the largest part of the movie, a naive blank. Quite a remarkable sustained feat. He has no psychological interest. There's no psychology to this character at all. The negative effect he has on the people around him are based on this fact that he doesn't have to struggle, that he's not a tormented artist, that he's just this natural genius who has no moods because he has no psychology. That's where the movie gets interesting, because in the final act, that very fact is what isolates him and becomes the source of his torment even before he becomes physically ill. Do you agree with that take?
I think it's more complicated than that. He is a man who finds himself baffling.
Well, yeah, you could say he's a blank, you could say he's an enigma.
To himself, though.
Okay, expand on that.
Those scenes are very important where he is trying to do that self-portrait. And this is actually what he did, right? He did paint, and the most interesting portrait that he painted, by all accounts, is the self-portrait where he's looking at himself in a mirror and just looking very puzzled by all of the different Gershwins that appear on that canvas.
But is that dramatized?
I think so. He knows that there is this demiurge that is consubstantial with his being, but he doesn't understand it, and he doesn't understand himself, and it's like he's just clinging for dear life to this 1 in a billion talent that he has. I don't find him necessarily a blank, but, mystified and mystifying. That's how I would describe him. The scenes with Joan Leslie, I think, are quite interesting. It all falls on her to convey the exasperating reality of what it would be to deal with this guy on an interpersonal basis.
I like his European girlfriend better, who obviously turns into the Joan Crawford character.
Yeah, Alexis Smith is great in this movie too, for sure.
Well, I guess we're going to get into what the two women signify. In very much the way that often in a woman's picture, you'll get two different men to represent two different aspects of the soul of the heroine. Well, here we get these women who kind of dramatize psychological aspects of Gershwin that, the Gershwin figure in this movie, that wouldn't otherwise be visible. But I suppose the reason I end up resenting the Julie character is because everyone around him, and it's so fascinating, everyone around him, after they break up, creates this myth that even he gets caught up in, but she doesn't, that really what he just needs is a home and family, and she could provide that.
Well, the reason everyone settles on Joan Leslie as, okay, this is the perfect woman for you, is they're assuming that she will just soothe him.
She's wholesome, she's not neurotic, she will give him children, she's not trying to be an artist. Well, she is, but she's not trying to be an artist. It's different, right? A singer is not a creator.
Well, not in the terms of this film, no. She never does settle down, from from what we see in this movie. I mean, she's not a real person.
But she's not in competition with him.
No, definitely not. I mean, she performs his songs.
So nobody, is too bothered about her career. Completely extraneous. What's important is that she can give him a home and children.
To the extent that she resents Gershwin's genius, it's because it's pulling him away from marriage and heteronormativity. Alexis Smith, on the other hand, resents his genius because she envies it.
Well, she's another enigma. The screenplay is so fascinating because on the one hand, it's more of an essay than a drama, than a psychological drama. And on the surface, it is very didactic and obvious and spelling out its themes a lot of the time. And that makes you think the screenplay is dumb. But the screenplay is not dumb. The screenplay is actually really, really subtle underneath all of that. So don't underestimate it. And it's full of these characters who are enigmas and that you really have to think about and that you can't fully grasp because they're not obvious. And the Christine Gilbert character is like that. It's not completely spelled out exactly what her problem is.
If Gershwin, as played by Robert Alda, is an enigma, well, I mean, he comes face to face with another enigma.
And that attracts him in a very particular way, in an intellectual way that obviously Julie doesn't.
He immediately forgets about Julie when he runs into Christine.
And her sadness is one of the things that attracts him.
Yeah, and it's not a histrionic sadness. It's a very understated melancholy. A lot of it seems to stem from unfulfilled artistic ambition.
And we get the Jamesian theme, right, of the naive American who goes across to Europe and gets some experiences with an expatriate, which Christine is, who has lost her Americanness.
Yeah, and that's Gershwin's diagnosis of her problem. Of course she can't create. She has transplanted herself too completely out of the soil that she was born in.
So I could probably have a lot of different diagnoses of what's going on with her, dependent on different viewings. But I guess on this viewing, it seemed to me that her problem is trying to be a woman genius in a patriarchal society.
Definitely that, but of course more on the surface and more tied in directly to Humoresque. You've got a woman who feels herself being drawn far too powerfully to another consciousness, and she fears being disintegrated in its gravitational pull.
Yeah, but part of that for her, for this character, is that she stops painting when she falls in love with him. There's actually a hopeful future for her in that she goes to Mexico and says, maybe I can work again. Like, she may never be a genius, or she may be, and she may never be recognized as a genius, but regardless, working on her art is important to her, more important than this relationship.
Yeah, you have to assume she went on to do some interesting stuff. The movie never goes back to her. A different movie would have shown her in Mexico, like hearing on the news, George Gershwin is dead. She breaks down in tears or something, but it really has the courage of its convictions. It's a really stunning opportunity for Alexis Smith to walk into the film, take it over for a while, and then leave again.
Yeah, she is wonderful in this. She looks wonderful. She just looks perfect for this role of this brittle woman, this woman who's holding herself back from, as you say, this emotional experience that could annihilate her.
As taken as Gershwin is with her, he's never really going to pay that much attention to her. So if she does give in to this, it's going to be very unfulfilling.
Well, yeah, if she can't make her art, and
he certainly can.
And he certainly can, and that's going to come first for him, then there's nothing for her.
That's right.
And she sees that. And Julie doesn't care if she comes second to his art.
No, she'd be happy if he had some room for her. And she doesn't think that he does.
Okay, but is that true? Because she runs away from him.
Well, yeah, because he doesn't have room for her.
Well, he says he does.
Yeah, but she knows he doesn't. He doesn't even have minimal amount of space in his heart for her that she would need. And the movie tries to make it seem like, well, by the end, under the influence of all this advice from various trusted family members and friends, maybe he's working his way toward it, and it's tragic that he makes that realization too late.
Well, I mean, I guess the difference between the women then and why they leave him, I guess in Christine's case, is that she's going to come second, and she knows that. But in Julie's case, it's because she knows that any hope that he's placing in her her is completely delusional.
Yes.
And to me, the tragedy, I mean, obviously, different audience members could read this in different ways, but to me, the tragedy of everyone, and including him, coming to decide that Julie's, it's very Jamesian, actually. It's very Beast in the Jungle. He starts to fixate, because everyone keeps telling him this is your problem. This is why you're unhappy. This is why you have everything you want, and you're this incredible genius, yet you're unhappy. It's because you missed Julie. That would have solved it.
This is why you're racked with headaches. Because he momentarily feels cured, and then, of course, he dies.
And then he goes like, yeah, maybe that's all I needed. I just needed a home and a family. You're like, are you kidding? Are you kidding? No, your fate is to be this artist, your fate is to be this genius that has no place.
But the film does set it up as plausible, right? Because it does show a pretty great home life for these young Gershwins. The mother and father are very supportive, good performances by Maurice Karnofsky and Rosemary DeCamp as well there.
And from the very beginning, we see Ira happily subordinating himself to the brother that at this point he's the only one who recognizes his genius.
At first, he's just happy that the spotlight is off him, which is interesting as well, right? Because Rosemary DeCamp is trying to force Ira to take piano lessons. He's like, well, no, George wants to do it. He can do it.
Yeah, because he doesn't want to be abnormal.
No.
And he's an example of someone who ultimately becomes an artist and is not bothered by whether I'm a genius or not. He just wants to write lyrics.
Yeah, he just has a nice, happy home life.
Well, except his home life is nearly interfered with by his devotion to his genius brother.
Well, Oscar Levant has a lot to say about the Gershwin brothers and Lee Gershwin. I guess for a large part of the 1930s, Levant was just kind of living in the dual penthouse setup with the Gershwin brothers and Lee Gershwin. He seems to have really taken a lot of comfort from the family atmosphere that was provided there. So they can't show too much of that because that would undermine the
heteronormativity?
Well, it would undermine the counterpoint, right? Because in a sense, Gershwin didn't need a mother like Julie Adams because he had Ira's wife to take care of him like a mother. She was apparently taking care of Gershwin and Oscar Levant.
Right, but still ultimately, I don't know about Gershwin's own life, but in this movie, still ultimately the thesis is without a family of his own, that this is the missing element in his life. This is the beast in the jungle.
It gets at this through his illness, though, right? Because he's not really questioning any of this or not allowing any of it to seep through to him until he can't play properly and he's racked with headaches and no one suspects that he's got a fatal tumor and he's going to die so quickly. And that's true, apparently. Levant says this took all of us by surprise. He started having headaches like 6 months before he died and it was getting worse, but no one thought he was going to die.
And of course, there's the time theme throughout the whole movie. It's always a fun, mystical way to structure a narrative about a precocious artist who dies young. This idea that they had this feeling like they had to fully realize, Jane Austen gets this, they had to fully realize their talent as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Keats and Shelley.
Yeah, because they're going to die, because they have this knowledge within them.
Although he says he has the longest lifeline you ever saw. But yeah, that scene where they're on the train and he's talking to Levant, he's interpreting the sound of the train as gotta make time, gotta make time, gotta make time. Very memorable.
In the myth of the movie, this is also why he has no time to stop and have a family. He has only enough time for his art to mature.
And to do this great service for America, right? Bring America up to par with classical European world, but on American terms.
Right, and the American terms turn out to be
appropriation from jazz.
Appropriation from Black people. That is the American element that gets combined with the European element, but through white Americans. The movie's consciousness of this, of the problems with this, are shown in, the movement from Al Jolson's minstrel blackface
Swanee
to a serious opera. Yeah, well, it's a one-act opera, Blue Monday, being performed by people in a different kind of blackface, white performers in a different kind of blackface, not the minstrel kind, but still pretending to be Black people. Well, at this point, there were some all-Black musicals. Even at the time, apparently, there were people criticizing musicals where white people were pretending to be Black people like this. So we see that, and even though you might think the characters in this performance are more dignified than the Al Jolson performance, still you have to take a look at what is being conveyed about the white imagination of Black people and the white imagination of art in this piece. And what does the professor, who's always encouraging Gershwin to fulfill his utmost genius and not just
write jingles,
not just represent the crass American materialist side of things, but remember the grandeur of the European tradition, right? What does he say about the breakthrough of this one-act opera? He says it's crude, and that's what's great about it. So this is white people trying to break through their own oppression using their idea of other races. We talked about this in our Paul Robeson series. This is what modernism was. Projecting your own id onto other races and then calling that artistic innovation.
Often an appeal to some kind of truer version of humanity, unalloyed by a certain kind of cultural veneer, or it's life among the lowly. That's the Blue Monday kind of. These are people who are living on the margins.
But at the same time, of course, those Italians who invented opera, that's how they represent themselves in the operatic tradition, right?
Opera is not known for its subtlety.
Yes, it's full of crude passions.
Yeah.
But that's what's so funny, because at this point, apparently you need to write an opera about Black people in order to access that, because it has become so ossified. The European tradition has become so ossified and so associated with wealthy patrons.
And what are you going to do? Write an opera about the Vanderbilt?
With high culture, it's no longer seen as being as crude as the stories really are. Screenwriters do make the effort of including a couple of Black people looking on at this performance, feeling moved by it because at least it is representation.
Of a sort.
But also, the movie's also suggesting, and let's be aware of this suggestion and what its connotations are, they can understand the passions being represented on this stage, and the highbrow, rich white people are shocked by this crudity. They don't get this kind of life. That's up for question, whether these would be the reactions of real people.
Well, it's a very schematic version of things.
Definitely. And then, of course, Porgy and Bess, where finally there are Black people performing this opera, even if it is written by a white man.
Of course, Porgy and Bess does rely on similar kinds of ideas of what that folk life would be like.
That said, Summertime, as performed by Anne Brown, is such an extraordinary piece of music.
There's a lot of great music in this movie. Yeah. And the Hazel Scott medley is excellent as well in Paris, so another great Black performer.
Oh, right, because even before that, once we see him go to Paris, all of a sudden, Black people are performing his music, which we have not seen in this movie before.
Outside of America. Expats,
yeah.
Which of course is a real thing in the 20s.
The movie is, like I said, it's conscious at all points of the racial implications of the argument it's making and the injustices, right? Even though these screenwriters are not allowed to spell those out, they're there subtextually in the movie. So Dave, what note is Oscar Levant adding to this movie?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In Memoirs of an Amnesiac, he claims that he walks off with that picture. And in a way, he's probably right. I mean, he makes quite an impression in all the scenes that he appears in. Comparing it again with Night and Day, you've got Monty Woolley playing himself as a pal of Cole Porter's, although the movie doesn't allow any of the truth of their friendship into that movie, and it feels very ersatz, even though Monty Woolley was a great friend of Cole Porter. But here, you've got Oscar Levant blending genuine, I find it a very warm performance. He kind of dismisses the movie as ludicrous in his memoir, but I feel like he really is getting a lot of the sincere admiration and love that he had for George Gershwin into his performance. And I mean, it's essential. Paul Whiteman is there to do that as well, but he's only glimpsed intermittently. Levant is a constant throughout this film, basically speaking for the audience as well, but speaking as, the most elevated avatar of the audience possible, because he's able to play Gershwin's music at such a high level. His affection for this weird enigma is palpable in all the scenes, but also his urge to point out what a strange person Gershwin is. The remarks that he makes are quite telling. He's placed in a position at several points of trying to interpret Gershwin's behavior, especially to the women that he's letting down.
Well, I think his most interesting dramatic moment in the movie, other than when he's performing, is when he commiserates with Alexis Smith.
Mm-hmm.
You think he's going to do the expected thing, which is, he's in the Julie friend group, right? So he's going to cut this woman out. We know this woman's fragile, so I'm kind of anticipating, you know how acerbic Oscar Levant can be. So I'm kind of expecting something awful to happen. Instead of which he appeals to her. They're both very smart people. And he appeals to her on the basis of the two of them understanding how they are always going to take second place to Gershwin and what that would mean to her.
Some very interesting scenes. And again, of course, Levant never made any pretense of being an actor, but he is a very emotionally perceptive and sensitive person. That's captured in this film and in some of the other ones that we watched.
Despite the fact that he's always playing a character, even in real life, I guess. He's always a persona rather than a person. Despite that fact, he always feels completely authentic in a movie in a way that no one else around him does.
And it does seem like he was allowed to write most of his own dialogue.
All right, yeah, I was going to say, too. Yeah, he comes equipped with his own persona. I mean, I'm sure people could write for him, too.
Right. He may be exaggerating, but it sounds like, most of the dialogue in all the movies we watched, he came up with or ad-libbed in some cases.
His bon mots.
You loathe me, don't you? They sound like they should have always been part of a performer's lexicon, but I think he really did bring some of this stuff into American films. There's no one quite like him before. I mean, it's almost Marx Brothers style, non sequitur and aggression for no reason. But it's not quite like the Marx Brothers either.
It's aggression against himself.
Groucho can be like that as well, but Groucho just never seems to have any feelings. And Oscar Levant, it's very clear that this is a man who is suffering as well as delighting people with his acerbic behavior.
No, Groucho Marx does not seem like he's suffering.
No. I mean, maybe he was in real life, but not as a performer.
Yeah, I mean, it's that Oscar Levant is like a wound in a movie.
He gets some pretty extraordinary opportunities toward the end of the film.
Oh, right, that's what I was going to say. The performance in the midst of which they find out that Gershwin is dead, then the whole emotional weight of that goes on to Levant and his performance, and everyone knows that he's there as the link to the emotional reality of Gershwin's death, of the loss of this artist to America and the world.
It's a remarkable performance by a non-actor.
Is he a non-actor, though?
I mean, he never claims to be an actor, but then again, many of the great Hollywood stars had no thespian training.
Exactly, that's what I'm thinking. It's like Barbara Stanwyck got on a stage one day, whoa, she's Barbara Stanwyck, she's an actor.
For a person who's often playing himself or someone named Oscar, he has a lot of range and an ability to communicate various states of being that really register. We'll move on to Humoresque, and we'll hear Leonard Maltin's opinions. He gives it 3.5 stars out of a possible 4. Ambitious violinist Garfield gets involved with wealthy, unstable patroness Crawford. No cardboard soap opera this. Superb performances, handsome production, hilarious support from Levant. And a knockout finale. Perhaps Crawford's finest hour. Young Robert Blake plays Garfield as a child, and that's Isaac Stern's violin on the soundtrack. Filmed before in 1920. The director, Jean Negulesco, who's been very active and very magnificent of late in films that we've been covering. The cast list, Joan Crawford, John Garfield, Oscar Levant, J. Carrol Naish, Craig Stevens, Tom D'Andrea, Peggy Knudsen, and Paul Kavanaugh.
Well, that was all true, except that it should be 4 out of 4.
Yes, I agree.
Well, this is one of those movies I've been watching since I was in my 20s. I've probably seen it, 10 times or something. It was never one of my very favorite women's pictures when I was younger. There was always something keeping me back from fully appreciating it. I always had some reservations about it. It's a little pretentious, the screenplay. But on this viewing, this is the thing. I mean, I say it often enough on this podcast, but those few movies that I started watching in my 20s, and they just turn into different things the older you get. They can become a new movie in every decade. And I mentioned having that breakthrough, seeing Magnificent Obsession on the big screen a while ago, another movie I'd always had reservations about, in that case not because it's pretentious, but because everybody thinks it's camp, right? And I had the same feeling watching this movie, not even on the big screen, just that this is one of the pinnacles of Hollywood cinema, and one of the pinnacles of world cinema. And Hollywood cinema, as we know from the BFI 100 Best Films list every year, is not appreciated, and that is bullshit, and that is stupidity, and that is ignorance. And this is one of the pinnacles of cinematic art, and what distinguishes it from other such pinnacles that I can think of off the top of my head is what we said when we did our episodes on Ethan Morden, where we were picking our favorite studios at the end, right? Where I said that Warner Brothers as an auteur in the 40s, the house style of Warner Brothers is so great, particularly in the women's pictures made in the 40s, that they don't even need auteur directors. They have great directors. All of their A-list movies have great directors, right?
Michael Curtiz, Negulesco.
But they don't need auteurs because the studio is the auteur in the 1940s, and they're making movies of genius. Okay, that's enough. That's humoresque. How do you feel about all of that?
Yeah, I love this movie. I've always been a huge fan. I saw it probably in my late teens. It was a PBS viewing. I had it taped off TV on VHS, so I watched it several times. It's a fascinating encounter between forces of nature.
This has got to be her greatest performance, and maybe the greatest use of her.
Well, you've said that about Possessed as well.
I know, and I love Possessed, and that's one I did appreciate from the beginning, but this might be even a little bit better.
Let's not forget Mildred Pierce.
I know, she has so many.
Yeah, obviously Joan Crawford is criminally underappreciated.
Particularly in the 40s, right? Those are probably her greatest string of performances at Warner Brothers.
Yeah, they really did a good job. She defected from MGM and she made the right decision.
Although A Woman's Face is very good.
It is. Well, she was making good movies at MGM too, there's no question. But yeah, this string of movies in the late 40s is hard to top. Daisy Kenyon, that's not at Warner Brothers, but an incredible movie too. So we really have to give Joan Crawford some credit for what's happening in her career this point.
But in the 40s, it's really the 40s she comes into her own. But of course she does have great movies in the 30s too, like Strange Cargo.
Yeah, for sure. And the first Possessed.
I said this about Crawford before, but I'm always happy to say it again. And in common with other great female stars from the Hollywood studio era, she's not a nice person. She's haunted. She's possessed by demons. Hollywood stardom in this era is partly about you can just be that. You can just be that on the screen. That's part of what it means to be a star. You can be a fucking terrifying person.
Yeah, but she's also extremely vulnerable.
Of course, vulnerable and emotional and all of those things that are so amazing in art that cannot be expressed in the same way in life. Physical and emotional violence, those things aren't beautiful in life, they're terrible, but in art, they're both.
And it's very interesting and useful to think about Crawford's character as a development upon the Alexis Smith character, which you introduced in our discussion of Rhapsody in Blue. Again, she starts out kind of with the upper hand, if you want to think about things that way, right? She's got John Garfield off balance, and it was kind of similar with Alexis Smith and Robert Alda in that movie.
No, but he's got her off balance too.
It's not an exact replica of the dynamic there, but things are steadily tipping in one direction in both films.
Well, she's supposed to be older. Like, she is older than John Garfield, is she not?
Yeah, well, Alexis Smith says she's older than Robert Alda in Rhapsody in Blue, too. I'm not sure. I don't think that's true of the actors, but she does a good job of playing someone who seems older than him.
Well, let's see. What are the differences here?
Joan Crawford's older than John Garfield.
Oh, Wikipedia puts her age as 1900 question mark. Probably around 1907 and 1913. So it's not a big age difference, but Garfield's playing someone younger than he is, right? let's imagine this woman is, I don't know, 8-ish years older than him, which is a significant age gap in 1946 for a woman to be that much older than the man. It could be more than that, though, because he's supposed to be in his early 20s.
She's been married a couple of times before, but the reason that she's got him off balance is mainly at the level of class and social capital. He has none, and she is in a position to make or break him as an artist.
But also he's naive and inexperienced. Now, in this movie, there are 3 women vying for him, for his soul. The ones that are important in this case are Crawford and his mother.
Yeah, Gina doesn't really figure too heavily in the film. She's sort of like the Joan Leslie character, but we hardly see her.
Right, because she is just the one who has been chosen for him by the mother because she doesn't represent any kind of threat. She's not interesting or forceful enough that she could break the mother's hold on John Garfield and make him more interested in another woman than in his mother, basically. But that's okay, but let's talk about that, because what that means is that Garfield himself is also a version of the Alexis Smith character, because it's really a question of, are he and his art going to be consumed by this woman, or is she going to be consumed by him and his art? So they're both that character, really.
The way Garfield plays it, you never feel like he's nearly as much in danger of being consumed as Crawford is.
I don't know, because that's what the mother fears. It's believable to me at the end. They're not going to be consumed in the same way, but he is in love with her. He's dedicated to seeing this through, and he is himself saying, you know, if you're going to keep acting like a maniac, I'm going to be distracted from my art. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to have to spend all of my time looking after you. You know, he's in his selfish way. He says he relates the future that she knows is true, right?
Yeah.
And she is going to destroy him as an artist if that's the case.
Those are the stakes, for sure.
So in other words, he is saying that I'm interested in you because you're like me and you're like my art and you're as interesting as my art. But I need someone, as my mother knows, I need someone like Gina who can support me. She's just there just to be a support for me and is not consuming me. I can't have anything else consuming me but my art.
Right. So that's dramatized in that early scene in the film where they're walking home from the conservatory and Gina thinks they're having a love scene and Garfield just is talking a mile a minute about all the concerts he's going to give and how his fingers are itching to play that violin all over the world.
And the most he can offer her is that when she says that she loves him, he doesn't laugh at her.
No, he doesn't laugh. He doesn't respond the way she was hoping either. That scene is rhymed later by the moment where Crawford shows up. You know, after finally hashing things out with her husband, she's got this incredible news to announce. She writes this note. It's such a heartbreaking. For me, watching it, I've always been, she's the one in danger here. The way you're putting it, it is a reasonable interpretation of the film, but I've never quite seen it that way. I guess I've always viewed the Garfield character as kind of unshakably devoted to his art, even if there are temptations here. He's not gonna succumb, and that scene is the pièce de résistance. If you're gonna key the interpretation to that theme, when she shows up and he just crumbles up this universe-expanding note she's just written to him, and he just treats it like it's nothing because he's got to rehearse again. That's when she decides to kill herself.
I know, though, but that's also very much her paranoid point of view. I have to be everything to you, or I can't function in this romance, right? I have to be everything to you.
But that's why it's so... I mean, you just see her die.
Yeah.
He kills her in that scene.
But he kills her again later. And again, this movie is full of these beautiful enigmas without interpretive closure. Because again, you don't know exactly what is wrong with these people and what is going on with them. He kills her again later when he says, maybe I will give up my art for you. Maybe I will succumb and you will distract me and I'll end up hating you because of that. Because, you know, I love you and I can't do anything else if this is how you're going to be, but I'll end up hating you because I'll have to give up everything I want, everything I am, right? So he kills her twice. He kills her by not caring and he kills her by caring. But in this thoughtless, selfish way where he, again, because the art is so important to him, the way he's talking to her, he doesn't understand how that is going to kill her, saying
Right.
that to her, right?
Yeah, because she does love him. I mean, her love for him is not selfish, even though it's insane. It registers very painfully with her if she considers that she could be the cause of
Yes.
cutting short his career.
And I don't know if she knows it's true, because the question over and over again is she just imagining the worst case scenario, or does she rightly see what the future is? The mother tilts her in a certain way. The mother is a villain.
Yeah, but what a wonderful performance. I love that actress.
By who?
Ruth Nelson, is that her name?
This is a movie where, I mean, obviously it has a tragic ending, and we don't know exactly why and whether it's justified. Consequently, when I watch this movie, I'm shipping Crawford and Garfield. I'm like, I really want them, this time on this viewing, I really want them to figure things out and get together. And the mother is the villain, right? She is absolutely adamantly opposed to it throughout, and at an important moment, it's that trope we've talked about often in these melodramas where the mother tells the sexually promiscuous woman that her son is involved with, tells her, you're going to destroy his life if this relationship continues. But it's a different and more psychologically interesting and ambiguous version of that. What's going on here?
Strangely enough, for a movie in 1946, there's not a lot of moral opprobrium cast upon Crawford for having been married a bunch of times and cheating on her current husband.
Well, but the mother does cast that opprobrium.
Well, she does, but it's, as you say, it's not because of any conventional betrayal of social mores. It's not because her love is not committed enough. It's because it's too committed to Garfield. That's why she's dangerous, as we've been talking.
The ultimate Crawford vulnerability moment, maybe, is when she shows up at this shop and the expression on her face when she, knowing who she is and this burden of her past up to this point, and her desire to change, to become a person who's not only more moral but less neurotic. Right? It's all resting on how the mother of the man she loves is going to receive her, right? And the absolute worst case scenario happens.
The red carpet is not rolled out.
And what the mother says is that he has to live cleanly. He doesn't even know this. So it's a variation of what everyone was saying to Gershwin in Rhapsody in Blue, but he doesn't even know this about himself. But if he gets off the straight and narrow, right, gets involved in your twisty, neurotic, drunken, emotional, tumultuous ways, the art is not going to come out of him anymore. He's not going to be the perfect receptacle for divine genius, right?
Yeah, he should be getting all of the melodramatic power he needs out of his violin. He doesn't need Joan Crawford to be flipping out constantly.
And that just sends her into a spiral. It's like if she had found someone there who believed in her and who supported her. That's where it could have gone a different way.
Yeah, but that was never going to happen based on the terms established by this film.
This is why this mother is a villain, and it is such a great performance by Ruth Nelson because she's a total villain. She's evil, but at the same time, she has a point.
Yeah, well, she's always been pretty focused. As soon as little Paul expresses an interest in violin, this is like, okay, we're gonna go with this. This is gonna be your life trajectory, and she is adamantine with her husband.
She has made this son into an artist. He's just a puppet of women. And she's made him into an artist. Crawford could mess that up and could also take him away from her emotionally. As long as he's an artist and he's married to his art, then he's not married to anyone else, so he's still married to Mom.
Those are the grand emotional terms. But now let us turn our attention to the support offered by Oscar Levant to this film.
Well, from the beginning, the way Crawford interacts with Oscar Levant in this movie, it seemed obvious to me that she as an actress had something personal against him, and it turns out that was true. I did find a blog post or online article talking about how much she hated him, apparently because he said something very vulgar to her on set.
Well, he speaks very sensitively about her in Memoirs of an Amnesiac. He talks about one day where he was at the Warner Brothers commissary and he saw Betty Davis cut her with a glance and Crawford retreating and crying.
Wow.
I mean, he presents that very sympathetically, but maybe he made a remark about that at the time that she didn't take kindly to. I don't know.
No. He made a vulgar sexual comment.
Ah, okay.
Because Crawford acts like he doesn't exist. She doesn't look at him once in the movie. Like, it's not natural.
I mean, it works for the film because he, again, represents the monastic devotion to music that animates the side of Garfield that she's terrified of.
True.
And he and Garfield make an amazing double act here. So I really like Robert Alda and Levant in Rhapsody in Blue. In that one, Levant sort of exists to elucidate upon the enigmas that Robert Alda is allowing to emerge from his blankness. And here, I mean, Garfield is obviously giving a much more forceful performance, but in the same direction of devotion to art. And Levant just sort of, embroiders upon that. He's not forced to explain all of it, and a more sort of cynical counterpoint. But they're really totally in sync in so many ways.
Yeah, fair. The actors aren't similar.
No, but it really is an amazing pairing. Like that scene in the garret there.
Yeah, that's a great scene between them.
So good. There's so much emotion running through it, too. Garfield smashing one of Levant's favorite records. And, I mean, it's almost a tragedy, but they pull back from it.
He's being very brash and hot-headed, and he's facing the brick wall of Levant being a sort of Zen master mentor, right? And just refusing to... giving him what he needs and refusing to give him what he wants, which is just, adulation. Levant works as a sort of weird Yoda, and that's what he's playing in this. Like, early on, that's what he's playing. He becomes a little bit extraneous once Crawford enters the picture, but then, Odets' pretentious screenplay is littered with Shakespearean echoes, and Levant becomes a kind of fool character, right?
And again, he is there to witness. He's able to show a softer side than Garfield can in this role. Not that Garfield can't be soft.
Well, the movie is very deceptive. It starts out and you think it's going to be this Künstlerroman about Garfield's character and exploring his subjectivity. But it's actually, the entire movie is actually from the point of view of Crawford's character. So he is a sex object. At the beginning and the ending, it's framed by Garfield's perspective on her. Ironically, in a way, she serves the role that he does for Priscilla Lane in Four Daughters, right? But even more so. Anyway, that's why he's not soft, because he has to be hard for her, because he's this interesting rough trade artist sex object, right? But in the frame of the picture, it is his Künstlerroman, and she is this experience that he's had, not so that he can go back to normalcy a little bit more matured, not as a coming-of-age experience like in Four Daughters or in Blue Velvet. Instead, Crawford's character is the storm in Lear. She is the void of the complete incomprehensibility, absurdity, and tragedy of life. And that is what he needs to actually become an artist.
Yeah, or to progress as an artist. And that's why I think that kind of validates what I was saying before, that there's not really any danger of him deviating from his path. And Crawford's doom is sealed as she comes to understand that. But as you say, I guess even hoping that she does break through becomes something that she abhors as well, because that would also have terrible consequences. Garfield kind of plays Paul Bourret as this unstoppable man on a mission. He does have a lot in common with the Gershwin character, who seems to be just going from strength to strength without really questioning his right to do so and any plans the universe might have to stop him. That's obviously very appealing to Crawford, but ultimately threatening to the point of death. Levant just witnesses all of it, comments on all of it, and participates in a good deal of it to the extent that he shares some of Garfield's ambitions without his
grace?
Not only grace, but immunity to self-reproach.
I guess I can see that. I guess it's fair.
Levant is a more well-rounded person, and that's kind of his downfall as an artist, the way this movie presents it, right? He's not able to command the attention and acclaim of the classical music world the way Garfield is, because he's too busy worrying that he might not measure up. And Garfield never has that difficulty.
True, but it's Garfield who actually falls in love love, and Levant seems very far removed from that possibility.
That's true.
I think another reason Levant fits into this movie as a person, and he is always playing some variation on himself, is that this movie, just like I said, it has a sucking hole of nihilism in the center of it. It's a film noir, among other things, right?
It is, yeah.
And his presence, it adds a comic note to that's nevertheless in keeping with the tone of the movie, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's too bad that he wasn't used in more film noir kind of scenarios.
Well, you feel that he has the same knowledge of the void that Crawford's character does. It's therefore ironic that they seem to be in different movies, even in the same scene, right?
And even though he's the one that makes it possible for them to meet. Now we'll turn our attention to Romance on the High Seas from 1948. Leonard Maltin gives this one 3 stars out of a possible 4. Sparkling, trivial romantic musical set on an ocean voyage with Doris's film debut, singing It's Magic, Put 'Em in a Box, Easygoing Fun. Directed by Michael Curtiz. The cast list, Jack Carson, Janice Page, Don DeFore, Doris Day, Oscar Levant, S.Z. Sakal, Fortunio Bonanova, Eric Blore, and Franklin Pangborn.
What do you think?
This was the first time for me seeing this one. It was a pretty fun movie. I wouldn't say I loved it.
No, this was pretty bad.
Oh, really?
It's got really good screenwriters involved.
Yeah, the Epsteins.
And
I.A.L. Diamond.
Yeah, doing some additional dialogue long before he teamed up with Billy Wilder. But this is a really stupid, rancid farce. However...
a good showcase for Doris Day.
Yes, I only know the later Doris Day, the virgin. Oscar Levant had a witticism about that, right?
I knew her before she was a virgin.
Yeah, this is not the Doris Day persona I'm used to, and she's really sexy in this movie, and she's weird, and she's very fun.
Yeah.
I really loved this performance.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. She's got some very strange quirks. Among them that she likes to plan out vacations that she doesn't believe she'll ever be able to afford. That provides the impetus for all the foolishness that happens later.
And she's playing this weird combination of she's somehow kind of a tough dame who's a screwball dame at the same time.
You should see more of the Warner Brothers Doris Days. I myself haven't seen a lot of them, including this one, and she rose to incredible heights at the box office during this period and kind of stayed there into the early 60s.
They could do no better for her as a romantic partner, though, than Jack Carson?
Jack Carson was big at the time. But yeah, they were trying her out.
Well, yeah, this did well.
She was an unknown quantity at the time, right? I mean, she was a hugely successful band singer. And she's a very attractive woman, but she's not exactly... At the time, I think people were wondering, would she play as a movie star?
She actually really resembles young Nicole Kidman before all the stuff she's done to her face.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, definitely.
More than anything, I feel like Doris Day may be channeling a kind of Betty Hutton persona here in these early films that she made.
Yeah, I feel like Betty Hutton is more slapstick lowbrow. Maybe that's what Doris Day is going for here, but it comes off very differently when she's doing it. This is much more of a strangely ethereal and...
Well, her voice is a lot different. It's a much smoother voice. It's not nearly as brassy.
Yeah, even her speaking voice
is
very breathy and high-pitched and ethereal. And that really changes the persona because it's a very distinctive voice. It's one of the most distinctive things about the performance. And other than that, she is just... Whatever she's decided to do here, whatever she thinks she's doing with this comic role, she is doing it with absolute confidence and consistency.
And I think you have to give some credit there to Michael Curtiz.
What do we want to say to try to do justice to this movie?
Well, it starts out as the saga of Don DeFore and Janice Page, who have like the worst marriage ever committed to celluloid.
Yeah, and that goes on for way too long. These two are not interesting.
Well, I like those actors in other contexts.
The setup takes way too long here. I mean, I guess, I don't know, it was Doris Day's debut, so they're just not entrusting the whole movie to her? Or...
Yeah, they had no idea. She's billed fourth. It seems like it's going to be their saga of mistrust and jealousy and strange apathy. Right from their wedding day, they are thinking that they are each liable to cheat and flirt with anyone. Horrifying portrait of American marriage. S.C. Sackall is there to give a little bit of fun to this marriage. The rich uncle who created the drugstore empire that provides the financial background for all of this jealousy and double-crossing and scheming.
Well, it's an infidelity farce, a genre invented by the French, but in the American version, nobody gets to actually commit infidelity. They just get to suspect it.
Yeah, there's absolutely no sex going on with either of these two people. It seems like, I mean, they're not having sex with each other.
Or anyone else.
No.
Their sex consists of suspecting the other person of having sex.
Yeah, Don DeFore really is just constantly trying to force through another big merger. And he's being forced to do this by S.C. Sackall, who says, I'm not giving him a vacation. He has to be at the meeting for this new merger. I don't do any work here. I went through enough when I was a kid. I got punched all the time. I liked his little stories about coming over to America and being abused, but by hook or by crook, building this fortune. And now he can sit back and watch his niece and nephew. I don't know who's actually related to him. It's not very clear.
My favorite part of that is, of course, when he starts telling the immigrant who made good story and Janice Page is like rolling her eyes.
Yeah. No, she doesn't care. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
But you see him go into it. That was one of my favorite scenes too. At a crowded party, you see him just doing the gestures and you know what he's doing. But you don't hear it at all. Like, there's some nice shorthand comedy that's developed over the course of this film. So Janice Page, the idea here, which we've seen in other movies, plenty of other movies where it has more emotional weight, the wife has her heart set on going away on a vacation, finally getting her husband out of the office and enjoying life together. And he keeps canceling year after year. They never go away. Finally, she decides, I'm going to pretend to go, and then I'm going to catch him in all of these sexual antics she imagines he's up to.
But the idea occurs to her because of this mix-up of identities with Doris Day's character.
Because the passport photographer sends an envelope with Doris Day's photo in it. Janice Page happened to have been at the studio when Doris Day was getting this totally gratuitous photo for a passport that she's never going to need because she just sings at a really cheapo joint.
Oscar Levant, as usual, is such a weird presence.
Yeah.
In this one, he is enlisted at the script level into the service of heteronormativity. However, he is such a weird presence that until Doris Day is on the ship and calls him her boyfriend, because she's like, oh, I got rid of my boyfriend or whatever, I had no idea he was supposed to be her boyfriend, rather than just a friend who keeps hitting on her. Or not hitting on her, but, proposing to her.
Yeah, he's hitting on her.
Sure, both.
In Hollywood terms, that means proposing. Yeah. Obviously getting nowhere. He also describes himself as the Svengali, or discoverer of this Doris Day singer.
So, I guess they're dating and he keeps proposing to her, but You would never know that they were dating from the way that they interact.
No, they don't have any chemistry, let's say.
My God. My God.
But that's to their credit, because they're not supposed to. I mean, they're really...
I've never seen a couple who's not supposed... Rosalind Russell and Ralph Bellamy have more chemistry in His Girl Friday than these two do.
Yeah, I mean, he's just half-heartedly leching on her. It's a pretty interesting performance in that sense that Levant gives, because it's not easy to convey this level of creepiness and disinterest at the same time. Again, he's sort of channeling, I guess, a bit of Groucho Marx here. Because Groucho Marx, this is one of his stocks in trade in the 1930s, just being unbelievably gross with women that he doesn't actually want to sleep with.
Yeah, but I don't even really get the sense that he's being gross.
No, he's being pretty gross.
How's he being gross? Where's he being gross?
Well, he's kind of her boss.
Oh, that's the most common thing in the world in these movies. Boss is trying to marry the singer and she doesn't want to marry him. And, Fred and Ginger movies. And
cashes all of her paychecks and uses it to pay his own passage to stalk her on
that's
a
more like a
ship.
That's more like a Jack Benny character. He's just generally really unpleasant.
I wouldn't call this the best use of Levant.
No.
And we put this on here because I wanted to include one that I'd never seen and get a sense of how studios thought they might use Oscar Levant.
Since we don't really have that much to say about this movie, maybe we should dig a little bit more into this Oscar Levant character. I mean, his character across the other movies as well. Get a little more detailed with it, because we haven't talked about in any detail about how this character relates to women. I mean, I said that in American in Paris, he's just completely outside the realm of romance, but other movies do try to get him somehow inside the realm or parallel to it.
Yeah, well, in real life, I mean, people knew that he'd been married a couple of times, and his second marriage lasted till his death, although it was a pretty fraught one.
Probably his funniest bit in Humoresque is the bit with the chick at the piano.
Oh, yeah.
So she's there. He's going to play at the Wright's house to earn his finger sandwiches and cocktails. She's just slouched on his piano. You know, normally that would be because she's trying to pick up the pianist. But it's Oscar Levant, so that's not what she's doing at all. He's annoyed by that, right? She's just sitting there, absolutely oblivious to him, fixing her hair and looking pretty. So he starts making comments about how much she repulses him and he repulses her.
Yeah.
And by continually doing this, he manages to get her, I don't know if interested is right, but off kilter enough to agree to sit down with him momentarily. And then as soon as John Garfield comes over and takes over the spotlight.
Yeah, he gets upstaged.
And off she goes, and he's like, oh, you saved me from the beginning of what would certainly be an odious relationship.
Yeah.
This is not Groucho Marx exactly, do you think? If so, it's in such a different, more of an existentialist register or something.
Well, yeah, again, I think that is the best way to understand Oscar Levant. It's Groucho Marx invested with the pathos that the behavior Groucho Marx exhibits in his films would have to really be suffering from in order to do the things he does. Like Oscar Levant is like the method Groucho Marx.
Yeah, so he actually hates himself, and I don't know, if I keep going down this path, I'm going to spoil the take on Oscar Levant that I developed through many viewings on American in Paris. But all I'll say here is the flip side of this self-loathing is an unhappy, a sort of miserable narcissism.
It's almost like a secret passage to understanding and acceptance of the entire world at the same time.
So maybe we can talk about that more when we get to American in Paris.
We're not going to talk much about Romance on the High Seas, but we should talk about the tourist trade number. That was awesome.
Yeah, this weirdly progressive song thrown in there.
When they're in Havana.
When they're in Havana.
So Avon Long delivers this amazing musical moment in the film where he just comes out of nowhere. Michael Curtiz really films this sequence beautifully as well. The ship has docked in Havana. They're browsing the kiosks and shops, and then the music, samba music, starts up, and this guy comes out of nowhere and starts singing about how obnoxious Americans are, basically, but how much they need their money.
Yeah, how stupid and obnoxious they are.
Yeah, and we're putting on a whole minstrel show for you, and it's worth it to us because we have no choice. You've left us in a position where we have to scrape away at your dollars in order to survive.
And Jack Carson very happily plays the ugly American
Yeah.
in this sequence.
Oh, it's so good. And as he walks out, he's like, I love that shot. Breaking the fourth wall. A little conversation with Michael Curtiz as he leaves. Anyway, that was great. But aside from that, yeah, this movie, there were lots of little moments that I found quite funny. Eric Blore as the doctor was great, who winds up diagnosing himself as on death's door. Interesting introduction for Doris Day. It was my least favorite Oscar Levant performance, too.
Look, the problem is he is brought, like I said, he is brought within the orbit of heteronormativity by having to play the Ralph Bellamy rejected boyfriend role.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be there. He should be allowed to exist in his own sphere.
I agree. I think that is...
Don't make him part of the narrative.
No, he should be commenting on the narrative, not forced to live as other humans do. All right, well, now that brings us to Barkleys of Broadway. Leonard Maltin gives this one from 1949 3 stars out of a possible 4 as well. Astaire and Rogers reteamed after 10 years in this witty Comden Green script about showbiz couple who split, then make up. Songs include You'd Be Hard to Replace, They Can't Take That Away From Me. Ginger reading La Marseillaise is a definite low point. Director Charles Walters, and the cast list: Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, Oscar Levant, Billy Burke, and Gail Robbins.
So you know how Easter Parade came about because Fred Astaire had to fill in for Gene Kelly, right?
Oh yeah, well this one, famously, Judy Garland was AWOL and they just cut her out and brought in Ginger Rogers.
Yeah, exactly. So the weird cycle's repeating itself.
Levant talks about how Judy, after they'd started filming, decided to start showing up and causing problems. Sounds like a pretty fraught set.
Wow, okay. This was pretty good.
Yeah, I really like this movie. I don't like it nearly as much as the RKO Astaire Rogers films. I mean, those are in a class by themselves.
What was anybody thinking with that? That was a joke, right? La Marseillaise, and this is supposed to be the greatest performance anyone has ever seen. That's gotta be a joke. Is that a joke?
It's hard to say because it is kind of a film à clé in a way, right? Because we know that in the 30s, a big problem is that she wanted to go out on her own and do dramatic roles.
Yeah, and she did prove herself as a dramatic actress, but this is ridiculous.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how to take it because she is a great dramatic actress.
And so is Judy Garland, and I feel like if she had recited that, it would be clearly comical.
Yeah.
Here, I'm not sure what's going on.
Well, she sounds vicious, which is fine. La Marseillaise is vicious. I mean, if you know the lyrics.
Well, neither of them, neither Judy Garland nor Ginger Rogers, should be playing Sarah Bernhardt, that's for sure.
No, probably not. Probably not. Works in the film's favor because in this movie Ginger decides, yeah, I'm going to go back to having fun in shows with no plots.
Yeah, but it's not supposed to be a failure.
No, it's a successful play, the Sarah Bernhardt play. So I don't know how you're supposed to take it. Maltin doesn't think much of her rendition of La Marseillaise. Now that I've really thought about it, yeah, this is definitely the first Levant movie I ever saw because I saw this movie very early. I saw it before any of the RKO Rogers and Astaire's. I saw it probably in about 1986 or something on TV.
Did he make an impression on you in this movie?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So describe what's going on with Levant in this movie.
So yeah, just watching this movie as a 12-year-old who really didn't have much of a sense of American pop cultural history at that time, it just made sense that Oscar Levant had to be someone who was famous outside of the context of just being a supporting actor like this. That does come out a little bit because you see him play the piano. It made me look around to try to figure out who he was, and I did. I mean, it wasn't as easy in those days to...
Yeah, of course it was. You just went to the library and you found some books on old Hollywood movies and you went to the index.
Yeah, that's what I did.
That's how we did it when we were kids.
I did come to some understanding of his meaning in the larger context of mid-20th century popular culture.
In my library, I came across the memoir entitled, which was important to me because at 12, I was also a huge Oscar Wilde fan, The Unimportance of Being Oscar. I didn't read it, though.
Yeah, well, that's one I haven't read. I've got to get that. But yeah, he made an impression. I've never forgotten the Weekend in the Country song, where he sings terribly about how he wants to go back to the city.
Right. Well, which is a very Oscar Wilde thing to say, right? Being bothered by the inconvenience of nature. So he's taking that Oscar Wilde persona on, or incorporating it into his persona in many ways, in addition to Groucho Marx.
Yeah. And here too, I mean, he is playing the best friend to both of the lead characters, really.
Yeah, he even does some matchmaking.
Yeah, he's the go-between. He cares about, I guess he's more akin to the Irving Thalberg Groucho Marx in this movie, because he cares about the romance of of the, well, here they're not the juvenile and ingenue, but the the lovers in this film. He's invested in them getting back together.
But what did you or do you make of his own series of romances?
Akin to no romance, right? I mean,
there are interchangeable Amazonian women who seem as indifferent to him as he does to them. Astaire even mistakes one for the other.
Yeah, at least Oscar makes a point of naming each one. But maybe that's because he wants it understood that this is not the same person. No one can stand me for more than one evening at the restaurant.
And he does a little bit of his Jack Benny, too, when he is stealing the food of one of his dates. It's almost a Seinfeld bit, though, too, that this schmuck...
Yeah, it's like George Costanza. Basic plot of this film. It's interesting, too, that this was made the year after Easter Parade, because it's got some themes that carry over, namely Fred Astaire trying to control the act.
Yeah, it's not nearly as good, though,
No.
either in the musical numbers or the handling of the plot.
No, I agree.
There's even comparatively a failure of chemistry between Astaire and Rogers, except for their climactic dance, which is fantastic.
You can't take that away from me. Yeah, well, that's a callback to, that's a song that Gershwin wrote for Shall We Dance?
Yeah.
So it's 12 years later redoing the same song.
But they didn't dance it before, correct? That's what I read.
No, it's true. He sings it on a ship.
Yeah, he sings it to her.
Yeah, that's a wonderful moment. Astaire and Rogers fans would come to this movie for that, primarily. It does have some interesting little moments that maybe are betrayed by the ending, right? Like this idea that she really did need his Svengali influence. I'm not sure how well that sits.
Yeah, exactly. It works against everything that Easter Parade was saying.
Yeah, Easter Parade was like, stop doing this. You have to let Judy Garland be Judy Garland. And this one is like, no, Ginger Rogers really is a mess without your guidance.
Right, which doesn't even make sense as a commentary on them as entertainment partners.
No, not at all.
I enjoy Ginger Rogers a lot in this movie, other than that terrible recitation. She's very, very funny, and in a different mode than what I was talking about with Joan Crawford. It's always lovely to see Ginger Rogers comically let loose her terrible temper.
Yeah. It's a great aspect of many of the RKOs with Astaire. He is quite frustrating in those films as a callow juvenile, and here he's frustrating as a middle-aged Svengali. Or wannabe Svengali.
Right, and he just keeps setting her off, and she flips out. I did find their bickering scenes to be fun and authentic.
Yeah, they are. I think it's a very enjoyable film to watch. When you're forced to think about it, it doesn't reflect well upon the film, especially when you've got the example of Easter Parade from the year before by the same studio.
Yeah, I just don't find the numbers that great, other than the one we already just discussed.
Right, which wasn't written for the film.
So it feels like a lesser Comden and Green, but I don't know if that's the general consensus.
This is not a movie that is revered, but well-liked, I think.
Oscar Levant gets his saber dance moment.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty fun scene where he just keeps saying, saber dance anyone? Oh, saber dance, right? And then he just plays it anyway. No one wants to hear the saber dance.
Yeah, of course, no one wants to hear anything that Oscar Levant has to do.
You loathe me, don't you?
Sheer paranoia.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's fascinating.
It is.
And then, because this woman is sitting there minding her own business. She isn't aware he even exists. And he's just sitting there feeling judged by her.
Yeah.
Right?
If she's got any sense, she loathes me. That's Oscar Levant's feeling.
But he could be saying it to the woman leaning on the piano in Humoresque as well. He says comparative things to her.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Every Oscar Levant performance, it's an unspoken vibe he gives off. You all loathe me, don't you?
But there's also something about it, and that's why he's given that scene with the woman at the piano in Humoresque. There's also something about it that is flirtatious and seductive. That he is flirting with us by accusing us of loathing him. Do you see what I mean?
Well, he's self-negging.
Can you do that?
Oscar Levant proves that you can, and he wormed his way, and maybe wormed is the appropriate term, into America's heart in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and is still beloved today by classic film fans like us. We will return to Oscar in mid-2025 with a look at the movies he made in the 1950s before his health took a sad turn. Next time on the podcast, it's the Hollywood Studios year by year. It's 20th Century Fox, 1948. This is going to be a great pairing. Roadhouse, again by Jean Negulesco, and Unfaithfully Yours by Preston Sturges. We will undoubtedly have much to say about these films.
2 all-time greats.
That's right.